very concerning escalation. And I would say the woman who was arrested a few days ago, I'm sure you've probably heard about the Turkish woman from Tufts University,
Yes. Yeah.
or she was taken into ICE detention. I mean, that's a very concerning escalation because all she did was write an op-ed. There was no, I mean, I'm not, obviously, I don't think people should be deported for participating in protests. But to put someone in ICE detention for writing an op-ed, I think then it's very clear that there's nothing. This is just speech. And Khalil's case is interesting and concerning because so basically the law in question that they're using is very rarely used provision of immigration law that says the Secretary of State can kind of unilaterally decide that someone is a foreign policy risk, like their foreign policy would undermine ours, and so they can be deported just based on his assertion alone. Now, I think it's clear that the First Amendment requires either that statute to be struck down as unconstitutional or to be read as excluding speech. And a judge can sort of decide how they want to do that.
Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to the Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Support the forum. Go to buymeacoffee.com/fountainheadforum. Thank you. Welcome to the party, pal. This is Fountainhead Forum 292. I'm talking to Jenin Younes, who is she's a free speech lawyer. As she says, she described herself, as like the old ACLU. When, for example, when the American Civil Liberties Union defended the Nazis in Skokie, we're going to talk about some free speech issues that are coming up, in particular with regard to what has been going on with people protesting, America's involvement in a certain conflict. Also, we may talk about some civil liberties issues that arose during the so-called COVID crisis of 5 years ago. How are you, Janine?
I'm great. How are you?
Okay, Janine, if you don't mind me just asking, how long have you been practicing law and what kind of law have you practiced over the years?
So I spent the first 9 years of my career as a public defender in New York City, so criminal defense, and
Yeah.
then I switched gears to sort of civil liberties. So that's mainly constitutional law. Um, that's what I've been doing for 4 years.
So you're in this for the ideals, aren't you? I mean, because you want
Yes.
'cause, public defenders do not get paid.
No, no.
But
My
but
first salary out of law school is $50,000 a year.
oh,
So
wow. But
yeah,
I don't wanna because I think public defenders are essential, though. But, you're in here
yeah,
to defend people's rights. I mean, yeah, you'll still well, even $50,000 even in New York City is not that easy to
no,
go.
no, it's not.
Yeah, I mean, it's a living, but yeah, so you really, got into law because you're a believer and now you've been, public defenders. I mean, that might be something else we could talk about too, but since then, you've noticed some of these issues, especially with what's going on in Colombia, and are you still in New York now, or
No, I moved to Washington, DC to, work at the job I have now. So I was very against COVID restrictions, even though nobody else around me was, 'cause I was sort of, all the people around me were on the left, as you can imagine for a public defender in New York. So, but I was just sort of instinctively, it seemed wrong. I had civil liberties problems with it as well as, sort of practical problems in terms of the consequences it would have for poor people and working people, to shut down everything. So I, wanted to get a job fighting COVID restrictions, so I ended up getting this job in, DC and moving here. And then I ended up doing a lot of free speech work that was sort of related to censorship around COVID topics.
yeah, I with DC and New York were probably about equally as bad, weren't they, or not?
Yeah, they were very similar. I would go back and forth because I had a lot of friends in New York when I first moved here. I mean, I still do, but that was where my social life was. So I would go back and forth, and it was very similar. Like the mask, they would sort of echo each other. So when the mask mandates came back there in New York, they were in DC too,
Yeah.
and then New York actually had like a vaccine passport program when I moved. So you had to show that you were vaccinated with COVID vaccine to get into bars and restaurants and that sort of thing. And then DC emulated that within a couple of months.
Yeah, fortunately, it sounds like that's all went away since then. But
Oh,
so
yeah.
what's going on right now? What are we seeing right now, though, with some free speech issues since Trump got into office? It's not looking very good.
No, I would say it's one of the most one of the most alarming free speech issues in modern history. And I wrote an article 2 years ago called "The Biden Administration's Unprecedented Assault on Free Speech" or something. The title was something like that. So, I think there's very severe free speech issues that have occurred over the last decade apart from this. But this one, I think, has escalated things to a new level where I mean, what the Trump administration is clearly trying to do is stifle any kind of dissent on Israel-Palestine issue, specifically on the pro-Palestine side. So they've taken to one of the strategies is to deport people who are not citizens who've participated in pro-Palestine advocacy. They also are doing stuff related to universities, basically saying they're not going to give them federal funds if they don't silence pro-Palestine advocacy. Of course, what they say is this is about fighting anti-Semitism and the violent protests and all of that, but it's very clear that this is ultimately about silencing certain viewpoints, which is the most abhorrent kind of censorship under the First Amendment. Um, and so, yeah, these are sort of all multi-pronged efforts, and I think that they're going to start coming for citizens next. They've actually said that, so I don't think any of us are safe. It's certainly not any of us who want to be able to dissent from government foreign policy.
Well, this is what always happens, they try it on the foreigners first and see what the
Yeah,
reaction is, and then they will go after citizens. And this is another reason why I generally consider myself an open borders person is because immigration law in reality and in the details is often very different from theory.
yeah.
The ideal is that we'll have this system, we'll let all the good people in, we'll keep out all the bad people, and it never works that way. It's weaponized for politics, it's weaponized for all kinds of reasons that are just nefarious, and, that this is very you know, it 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 seems like they're starting, and of course, we wanna clarify too, Trump is, Trump has been so inconsistent on so many things, but one thing he's always been consistent on is that he's Israel's bitch.
Yeah, yeah. I probably naively had some hope when he first got elected, the second time, since he sort of has, said he was gonna end the war. I don't
Yeah.
consider it an actual war, but whatever. We don't have to get into that. Um, and because he brokered a ceasefire deal immediately, so I thought, "Okay, he's serious about this. He really wants this to stop." I don't know what happened. I don't know if it was all just a ruse, to make it seem as though he had authority and he was going to be sort of even-handed, and then all along he intended just to allow Israel to do what it wanted. Or if something happened in the meantime, and it was made clear to him that he better change his policies. I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, and so there's already been a few. I know there's that one high profile case that's going on. Is it Khalil or
So Khalil, yeah, that's the biggest one, I think, because he was the first main target too. And the administration completely screwed this up. They thought so. For people who don't know, he was at Columbia. He was a graduate student. He's married to a United States citizen who's 8 months pregnant.
yeah,
Um, as someone who just had a baby, that part
yeah,
gets me too. I'm like, imagine my husband being snatched away from I mean, that's just horrific.
yeah.
So he was basically ICE agents showed up at his house in the middle of the night and took him away on a Saturday night. They thought he was on a visa, and his, wife said, "No, no, he has a green card," and produced it, but they said, "Oh, well, we're taking that away too." Now, initially, the administration was trying to make these allegations that he had behaved, engaged in sort of poor behavior, possibly even criminal, like Colombia had a lot of encampments and they were taking over buildings and trespass. I think most of this stuff is pretty low key, frankly, and was kind of overblown and it was an attempt to sort of deflect from the real issue and make it seem like the problem was these anti-Semitic Hamas terrorist protesters. And I think they were just a bunch of college kids who can get kind of silly and not always behave that well. But it turned out he actually hadn't done anything. He's 30. He was clearly a little bit more mature. He was actually acting as an intermediary between the administration and the students when the students were making a lot of demands. There is no violent behavior that could be traced to him. The administration has tried to say he's pro-Hamas. All of his public statements that we know of, he's only said he believes in peace between Palestinians and Jews should live next to each other in peace. His group, Columbia Apartheid and Divest Group, had an Instagram post calling for the destruction of Western civilization, but he's apparently only loosely affiliated with the group. No evidence he knew about their
Yeah.
Instagram posts. Like, like I said, I'm a member of many groups. I don't pay attention to every single thing they post, and I certainly don't agree with everything they post. I think it's like
Yes.
clearly a big stretch. So initially the government moved him from New York to a facility in Louisiana. I think probably the idea of that was to get a more favorable judge because you're more likely to get a more favorable conservative judge in Louisiana. The judge in New York ordered him moved back to New Jersey, and so he's currently undergoing proceedings there.
Yeah, I believe, that Louisiana is per capita the most incarcerated state.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
He would have been in an ICE detention facility, which are even I did
yes,
some immigration law work when I was a public defender. They're even worse than prison. So even though a lot of people there haven't committed crimes, it's pretty bad.
this is one of the interesting things that seems to be uniquely American. Uh, I worked with a guy who overstayed his visa in Argentina. He overstayed his visa, got arrested,
Yeah.
and the next day, he was on a plane.
Yeah.
But in
Yeah.
America, there's this whole business of immigration detention has become a business now.
Yeah.
We're not just gonna send the immigrants back to where they're citizens. We're going to put them in a detention center for who knows how long and profit from that. And
Yeah.
it has become an industry, and I don't know if any other country has an industry like this.
Yeah.
I
It's shocking, yeah. I mean, the fact that people are making money off,
Yeah, I
detaining
mean,
people is not.
because a lot of these countries, and granted, some of them are much more poor. They say, "Look, we don't want you here. Get out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Pack your bags, leave, go home. It's just done.
Yeah.
Bye bye." And I would certainly rather have that. I would certainly rather have that happen than end up in this system. And it's really not
Yeah.
that much difference from what sounds like the system of Guantanamo Bay and rounding up enemy combatants. And really, Janine, I think really, well, we can say this started with Trump. Really, this all started after the World Trade Center. This is really
Yeah.
in the free fall.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know if
Yeah,
you were practicing law back then, but
no.
you were you in New York when that happened, or
No, I was in Ithaca, New York, which seemed really
oh
far away. I was still in high school.
well,
Oh,
yeah, well, of course Ithaca is also where Ithaca is, but also Cornell, yeah. So
yeah.
and
Uh,
that part of New
Go ahead,
York's
sir.
very different from the city from what I hear, yes.
Yeah, it felt we lived in a different world, but New York City seemed like a different
Mm,
it didn't feel like it was close to home to me at that time, but I was also young, so, just that
yeah,
kind of
and I think there are some, instances here where I think some of the protesters are crossing lines. I mean, I myself personally, I absolutely positively hate traffic blockers. I mean, I've stood outside police department buildings, I've stood outside the Austin Capitol on the lawn, but I'm not gonna go stand out on the street and, stop people from driving and getting their work done. It's just
Oh,
I
yeah,
and like Rudy
for
Giuliani
sure.
once said, he said, "Look, if you throw a rock, we're arresting you." That's a pretty
Yeah,
clear boundary too. I mean, throwing a rock or
yeah.
maybe yeah, but when these people
Well,
just
one
yeah,
of the problems I think is there's just been there's this well, other people were doing this and he
yeah,
was part of it. Well, that's not I mean, that's not
yeah,
how classical liberalism works or basic criminal law principles. You don't, you can't the conduct of the thousands of people that are participating in the protest can't be ascribed to everybody else.
yeah,
That's just
exactly.
not how things work and nobody can point to anything except his speech. So it's very clear. I mean, it's a very concerning escalation, and I would say the woman who was arrested a few days ago. I'm sure you've probably heard about the Turkish woman from Tufts University,
Yes, yeah,
or she was taken into ICE detention. I mean, that's a very concerning escalation because all she did was write an op-ed. There was no, I mean, I'm not obviously I don't think people should be deported for participating in protests, but to put someone in ICE detention for writing an op-ed, I think then it's very clear that there's nothing. This is just speech. And Khalil's case is interesting and concerning because so basically the law in question that they're using is very rarely used provision of immigration law that says the Secretary of State can kind of unilaterally decide that someone is a foreign policy risk, like their foreign policy would undermine ours, and so they can be deported just based on his assertion alone. Now, I think it's clear that the First Amendment requires either that statute to be struck down as unconstitutional or to be read as excluding speech. And a judge can sort of decide how they want to do that. But the First Amendment is a restraint on government. It says Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. It's not about the immigration status of the speaker. And the Constitution prevails over statutes, right? Like any statute to be
Yes.
constitutional has to be consistent. So if the statute can be read to allow someone to be deported just for speech, then it's unconstitutional. Or, as I think some of the free speech groups like Fire advocated in Amicus, it should be read to exclude speech as a basis for deporting someone for as a foreign policy risk. Because and some of the congressional statements when the law was enacted indicated that they said things like this is clearly about more than speech. The person has to have done more than engage in speech.
Yeah, and it's there's often, that question of what, what is speech?
Right.
One practice I am sympathetic to is I'm sympathetic to chalking. People will go out on the sidewalk and write their cause in chalk. And of course, the next time it rains, it just washes away. But I would not be sympathetic, to somebody taking, a can of spray paint and writing their message, because that's really
Yeah.
vandalism that has to be cleaned up.
Right.
I can see, as you can see, I really do consider myself a free speech absolutist. Yeah, it's interesting. I remember years ago when I lived in Columbus, there were actually some students camping out at Ohio State, and nobody said a word about it.
Yeah.
It was only like 10 though, and this was on
Yeah.
Google, which was about the size of a football field. I don't know.
Yeah.
Camping, I think I would kinda draw the line, but, I just give people a warning and say, "Look, you got 6 hours to get off of here and go and take your stuff with you," but then, it's because it's not really, it's not really something you're expected to do, because the same reason you don't want people camping out on the street. But I
Yeah.
yeah, but it seems like to me, though, there's just policing the content. Just curious, why does it seem like Columbia has become ground zero for this?
I That's a good question. I think, New York City is so everything is volatile there. I
Yep.
suspect the protests might have been very heated on both sides. Uh it's I'm not totally sure. It could just be that's just what, the one that happened. UCLA also I'd say was like also hotbed of all of this as well, but
Oh,
clearly
really?
Columbia has. Yeah, UCLA was pretty and UCLA actually the pro-Israel protesters were acting very violently. You wouldn't know that from the, media coverage, but,
Well,
uh,
out on the West Coast, Cal Berkeley has that
yeah,
reputation, you see this
yeah,
happening at Columbia, but it's not happening at NYU, so
yeah. Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know. I went
or
to
St.
NYU Law
John's,
School.
or because there's
It
actually a bunch of colleges in New York City.
Yeah, I don't know. It may be that, Columbia has more foreign students. I'm not sure, but, yeah, it's unclear to me.
Or could it be because Columbia probably has more kids who had everything given to them? I
Yeah, that although NYU has a lot of entitled kids. But I I mean, there was this professor named Shai Davidai, do you know him?
No, I don't know who that is.
He was an Israeli, he's actually here on a green card, ironically, and he was going around and harassing a lot of the pro-Palestine students and behaving just for a professor, just behaving completely, unprofessionally, like following 18-year-old girls around who are pro-Palestine and videotaping them and then putting the video up with commentary on Twitter, just kind of extremely unprofessional stuff. And I think the university hasn't done anything about that. He was at some point put on leave for his behavior, but for a long time didn't do anything. I think that created a lot of the students were angry. Um, there there may also be some. I think it might, as you sort of insinuated, there might be something to do with the professors and students at Columbia where there was sort of a concerted effort to, portray this as, like, anti-Semitic hordes, just, terrorist hordes, as opposed to, like, kids who sometimes get a little bit passionate and out of control.
Well, and the other thing too, I know from experience, some of the loudest critics of, say, of Netanyahu, of the policies, right, that are happening right now are American Jews.
Absolutely, yeah.
Not all of them, but there are certainly some of them. They just say, "Not in my name. I don't want this."
I mean, a lot of the people I work with, to fight these policies are Jewish. And I was in Students for Justice in Palestine when I was in college, which was a long time ago, and I think it was a little different. I think it was a little bit more low key. But half the other people in my program were Jewish. So whenever they try to paint these protests as like hotbeds of anti-Semitism, I just know, from life experience that's not. I'm sure a lot of these kids and they were, like, holding seders at the Columbia encampment, you know?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah, Seder, of course, is the Passover. Yeah, I had Rabbi Yaakov Shapiro on a while back too, so
Oh,
he's
yeah.
he very much talks about has said Zionism is not our belief.
Yeah.
He considers it a heresy.
Yeah, I mean, there seems to be a lot of reason for, believing that.
Yeah, and New York, yeah, it's just maybe New York just becomes that hotbed, but you're not even seeing it at the other Ivy League schools like Harvard. But
That's true. There's been this long history with Columbia, like, Barry Weiss had attempted to use her influence when she was a student there to get Joseph Massad, a Palestinian professor, fired, and a bunch of there's just Columbia seems to have this sort of long-standing antipathy towards the Zionist and non-Zionist, crowds, so maybe that was just sort of ended up sparking there, for sort of historical reasons.
they don't really want to get involved. Is that what you're saying? Or
Sorry?
they don't really want to get and take a side. I mean, because
The administration? Yeah, and maybe because there's just been these issues going back for decades. I mean, I think it was almost 20 years ago, or it was 20 years ago that Barry Weiss was trying very hard to get Joseph Massad and other professors at Columbia who were pro-Palestine fired, and she led, like, a very concerted effort. So I think there might just sort of, what tends to happen in these circumstances is both sides kinda calcify and get more and more, extreme in their messaging and probably have more and more antipathy towards each other. So that might be why this sort of just got out of control at Columbia.
because I suppose a lot of these students wouldn't even have been alive when the World Trade Center happened.
Yeah, they must I mean, the majority of them are 18 to 22, so they're probably
Yeah.
born after, yeah.
So and maybe obviously that's I mean, I know some that was a very emotional day for all the New Yorkers that I know. Just uh, that I mean, that's a day, that's one of those days,
Yeah.
we all remember where were you when you found out about this? Yeah, I know where I was. I was in,
Yeah,
so I do wonder sometimes if yeah, and so what are some other cases that are going on right now? Besides oh, can you spell his name by the way? Khalil. Is
yeah, it's Mahmoud Khalil, Khalil.
Yeah, and what?
Um, that is his last name. His first name is Mahmoud. So, and then yeah, um so the woman who was taken from Tufts the other day, Ozturk, I forgot her last name, something Ozturk. She was a postdoc student here on a visa, and she had just all they're saying she did was sign on to an op-ed calling for Tufts to divest from Israel, and citing sort of human rights rationales for that. So she is in detention now. And then another case that's of interest is Yun Seo Chung. She's a 21-year-old, from South her family's from South Korea. She's been living here since she was 7 and has never been back to South Korea,
Yes.
I think. She's also at Columbia, and she participated in protests, but was not accused of, having done anything really bad. She was apparently arrested. The NYPD does these, like, mass arrests at protests. They're not, like, specifically looking at individual conduct. They're just kinda taking everyone in an area, and they'll often, like, you a ticket or just let you go later. So I think she got a ticket, but wasn't, for anything that was a big deal. It was like, you know, being part of a crowd. Uh, so she actually had some initial success. The judge in her case in Manhattan granted her request for a TRO, that's a temporary restraining order. And
Yeah.
basically said the government has to halt deportation proceedings for now. The judge has seen no evidence that she's done anything wrong or to warrant detention or deportation, which is a good sign. That means that the judge is sort of rejecting the government's claim that it has unilateral authority to deport people just based on the mere representation that they pose a threat to our foreign policy. The judge is saying, clearly this is subject to judicial review. So that's good. Because if judges were saying, well, if the government says that the person violated this provision, they can just be taken out of the country even if they've been here since they were a child, that would be bad.
Yeah, sometimes I do think that, they wanna engage in deportation just so they can not go through all the red tape of having a trial, but that's why we
Yeah.
have trials. It's, and she was, which is interesting because she's South Korean and a Turk. These are countries that are generally allies of America. They're not
Yeah.
really, we don't have a state of war. In fact, as somebody pointed out, South Korea is, whether you approve or disapprove of America's war, somebody pointed out, South Korea has been fighting with us every war we've had. It's I
Yeah.
certainly, yeah, they're certainly not an enemy. I mean, it's
Oh, yeah, well, I don't know if the Trump administration has thought through the
yeah,
repercussions of behaving this way because I don't think it's gonna be. I mean, if we're treating foreign students like this who are just here to study, and a lot of these people benefit our society. One person who was deported was a brown, surgeon, and she, like, all her surgeries were canceled, and she's a specialized, I think, kidney surgeon. Like,
yeah,
not everybody can do what she did. In fact, I'm not sure there's anyone in the country who can do what she does. So, and she, there were 2. I might be mixing her up with another person. I think she had been to Nasrallah's funeral. Nasrallah was the Lebanese Hezbollah leader who was assassinated,
yeah.
not a very targeted assassination. They took hundreds of other people out with him, but, that's what Israel does. Uh, and, so, I think she had been coming back from his funeral, so I don't wanna say, like, that's, like, a different level than just writing an op-ed. I will, and I'm not sure the degree to which I think the government should be able to not let people back in for having gone to a funeral like that. I will say what I can say for certain is the double standard is disgusting because, like, I'm sure if, an Israeli who is here on a visa had been to if Netanyahu died and was at his funeral, I'm sure that would be no problem whatsoever. And Netanyahu has killed, you know, hundreds of thousands more people than Nasrallah. So
Yeah, well, yeah, and the other thing, they talk about national sovereignty and all this stuff, and well, what about the rights of all those people who needed to have those surgeries?
yeah, yeah,
And now they're not going to
yeah,
they're going to miss the
yeah,
surgeries, possibly putting their life at risk. I mean, I've even heard stories, of, granted, I think I don't know how many of these stories are accurate, but I've even heard things, like bone marrow donors being denied entry. Somebody,
yeah,
like somebody in the US needs a bone marrow transplant, and the only person who can provide one is from a foreign country, and they won't let them in.
yeah,
And
yeah,
we're and not to mention, I could talk about Khalil. I said, "Oh, great, we're gonna have another kid raised without his father." It's
yeah, yeah, exactly.
we certainly don't need more of those, but
Yeah,
and apparently, even being married. Yeah, being married to a citizen, I just you're not even safe if you're married to a citizen, and I know even
yeah,
I know from truth, or if you're even engaged, because I would think
yeah.
that would put you on the fast track to citizenship.
Yeah, it does, and
Yeah,
so you I think you have to it has to be 2 years of
yeah,
marriage, and then but there's usually some delays, like, it takes a little while till you can even start processing, so I think in practical reality, it usually takes, like, 3 years, but a lawful permanent resident, especially one getting, citizenship through marriage, is on the path to citizenship. They're building a life here. They're not a student, he's here for a semester on a visa, which obviously I think it's problematic to start deporting people for their speech then too, but, I
yes.
mean, here you're really looking at another level, and, I mean, he's about to be a father, what are they supposed to do? The other irony, of course, is that Khalil is Palestinian and grew up in a Syrian refugee camp because Israel drove his family out of his home, so, he's a refugee, he's here one of the reasons he's probably here is because he didn't wanna keep living in a refugee camp, and, so we just really screw these people over in multiple ways, and, you know, uh, uh, we're uh, we're making ourselves far less safe with this kind of behavior, in my opinion. I mean, we're really making the global South very angry with us, and I don't blame them at this point.
Well, and in some cases, you could be radicalizing these people. These people said, "Well, I went to America, tried to build a good life there, and then America, did this to me." So it certainly doesn't,
Of course, of
having
course.
having been born and raised in America, I certainly don't have the same love for America that I had when I was in the Boy Scouts or in the Cub
Yeah.
Scouts. I mean, geez, it's because it's just I mean, sometimes the country just seems like such an unbelievable fraud to
Yeah.
me. It that puts out this creed, but then doesn't even try to follow it. Uh,
Yeah. And I mean, for Trump to go around calling himself the free speech president is just like, it's so laughable at this point. He put out an executive order dealing with the work that I did. I mean, not specifically mentioning it, but I brought a number of lawsuits against the Biden administration alleging that they were unlawfully
yeah,
involved in social media censorship. And so he wrote an op-ed restoring free speech in America and banning that kind of government and social media interaction. And, like, what a joke you are. I mean, really, to say you're bringing back free speech and then you're throwing people in ICE detention and deporting them out of the country for writing op-eds. And they said citizens will be next. They're gonna start looking at naturalized citizens, which is very scary because and so this is another thing about the Khalil case I haven't mentioned is that now they're saying he lied on his application to get a green card. He had interned at the UNWRA in Syria, and he didn't put that on his green card application. I don't know if you would be I don't know enough about green card applications to know if you would be expected to put an
yeah,
unpaid internship on it. I suspect not. It might be the kind of thing where you're like, well, there are only 5 lines and I had 8 jobs, so why don't I just put the paid jobs? Like I feel like that could be a reasonable thing, but maybe the question is more specific. I don't know.
yeah,
But if they wanna find something you've done wrong, like, we've all done tiny things wrong, right? Like, whether on purpose or just by
yeah,
mistake. And once the government starts deciding it's gonna start coming for you, and it's gonna find a way to do that, none of us are safe. And, like, my father is a naturalized citizen. He was naturalized, like, 30 years ago. So hopefully he wouldn't be first on their list, but, there's he was born in a small village in Palestine. He doesn't even know the date he was born. He was taken to the city to be registered on
oh,
April
wow,
21st. Yeah, like, it's possible there are 2 inconsistent dates,
yeah,
April 21st and April 22nd, then they're gonna say you lied on your citizenship form, we're stripping you of citizenship. There are certain, like, names of villages and stuff that have changed
yeah,
over time, so it could appear that
oh,
there are
yes,
inconsistencies. Like, this is very scary stuff, and then, I mean, we know based on history that, as you said earlier, they start with with non-citizens because 'cause they're low-hanging fruit, then they go to the naturalized citizens, and then they go to the natural-born citizens.
yeah. I remember, filling out my, just filling out one application. I didn't really know.
Hmm.
I didn't know what city my mother was born in, so I just wrote down the name of the county because I
Oh,
didn't know.
you're a naturalized citizen?
Oh, no, no, I no, I
Oh,
no, I
I was like, "You sound very,
I still
American."
didn't I still didn't know, but I still
Oh,
didn't
yeah,
know
yeah.
exactly what city my mother was born in.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But I can go down to the county and get her birth certificate. Yeah, you've got a lot of
Yeah.
these people, and some of these places, they may not be very good at keeping records.
Yeah,
Israel,
yeah.
Israel could have bombed the building where the records were, and the records are gone. I mean,
Yeah.
we've got
Yeah,
lots.
exactly. Exactly, and so now they're saying, well, now the basis for the deportation is that he lied on his application. What I hope, and I'm not exactly sure how the legal issue will play out, but if the government is coming for you based on your speech and then tries to find some other reason as like a
Yeah.
pretext, I hope the judge will say, no, 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 you
Well,
can't do that.
yeah.
But
Well, this is, often what happens is it seems like the people who end up in the worst shape are the people who try to do things by the book.
yeah,
Not related to the Palestine issue, but there was that Venezuelan guy who, went through all the paperwork to get a visa to come here. And then as soon as he shows up at the airport in Houston, they ask, "Do you have any tattoos?" He says, "Oh, we're arresting you because you got tattoos." So,
yeah,
you have a case where one bureaucrat says, "Oh, everything's okay," and then you have another case where another bureaucrat says, "No, not okay. Put him in the detention center."
yeah.
It's really becoming a minefield, I think, for immigrants, and it's going to really just discourage. I guess that's really what they want to do anyway.
I think that's what they
They
want
just
to
want to
do.
discourage immigrants from coming here because,
Yeah,
Janine, as much as I blame Trump and the administration, I blame Americans for this. They hate.
oh, yeah,
They're totally complicit with this.
of course, yes. I mean,
They don't care. They do not care.
no,
They do not care one iota. They wouldn't care if our military went out somewhere and just invaded some foreign country and killed 200 million people. They would just
oh,
be
yeah, no.
flags. Yay, America!
They I don't know, are you on Twitter? it's the most depressing. I mean, the things you see people saying, there is no empathy, just this utter coldness, lack of I mean, I never thought I would see so many people celebrating the deaths of babies. I didn't think it was possible to celebrate the deaths of babies.
Yeah,
Something has gone I think, I was actually in a podcast with another woman recently, and I don't wanna take she said something I thought was very insightful, which is that, people are really suffering, I think, that there are a lot of just we have a lot of issues in our society. There's a lot of fear, and people are turning it onto this is what happens, just as it happened to the Jews in Nazi Germany. They turn it onto they create scapegoats, and right now it's like brown Arabs and Muslims mostly. And I'm not a very woke person. I don't I'm not someone who's obsessed with, like, intersectionality, sorry, and, the social justice stuff, and I'm sort of for, like, we treat everybody the same, it shouldn't matter, but I've sort of started to feel more scared, like, you start to feel, just these groups of people who feel like I don't belong, that I'm somehow and I see people saying it to me on Twitter, "Go back to your Islamic shithole." Like, never mind, I've been here since I was 2 years old. And my mom is American. I don't speak any language other than English. America is my home as much as it is anybody's. Like, there's nowhere else I wanna live, and it's really, really scary to have, and I think I've stood up for America and the Constitution more than most people, but then to have because I have the wrong views on the Middle East on the right, and because I have the wrong kind of name, it does, like I feel, like, more scared than I've ever felt in my life in a way.
and, it's very unlikely to happen, but what happens, say, if heaven forbid it ever does happen, what happens, say, if Ilhan Omar becomes president, and then Ilhan Omar says, "Well, I'm gonna deport everybody who disagrees with me."
Yeah.
You've got this cycle of just
I mean, I don't think it's that far-fetched that, like, a Democrat administration would I mean, then I actually said this on Twitter. I had a friend here during, at the beginning of COVID. That was actually how we became friends. We were both very anti-lockdown and anti-mandate. He was here on a work visa from Australia. He writes for the Australian newspaper.
yeah.
And Democrats could have used the same logic and said, it is our policy to fight COVID all over the world. And people who think that we shouldn't wear masks and shouldn't vaccinate and shouldn't lock down pose a threat to that foreign policy and therefore should be removed from the country. And he could have been deported on that basis, along with a number of my friends on green cards. Conservatives have not, they're not adequately thought this through. And there are lots of Democrats who are very authoritarian. That's one reason I don't like the left at all. They love to impose their will on other people. And so this could complete if courts accept this kind of thing, it could completely be turned against conservatives next administration.
Yeah, and, uh, I am wondering, it seems like the NYPD is cooperating with the feds in this, but could there be a situation maybe where the state says, "No, you can't do this," because New York, obviously, I mean, I know Letitia James is not friendly to Trump at all.
Yeah.
Not,
I'm actually
some of her lawfare has been completely immoral, but
yeah.
she's come in and say, "No, you're not going to arrest these people in my state," or
I'm actually surprised they haven't. I put something on Twitter. It didn't get my tweets like either go nowhere or very viral.
yeah,
I haven't figured out the recipe, but I put something on Twitter suggesting they do that. Conservative attorneys general did that during COVID. I was actually part of one of those lawsuits on behalf of individual plaintiffs. Missouri and Louisiana sued the federal government, arguing that the censorship was violating the citizens of their states' rights. And I was like, the liberal attorneys general could totally do that and say, and, attorneys general have a lot more resources than an individual, and they have a lot less to lose. Like, if you sue the Trump administration, you can be putting a target on your back, but attorneys general are in a much better position to do that. And, you can have, like, when I worked on Missouri versus Biden, you have 20 lawyers working on a case. That's, far more resources than an individual is going to get. So I don't know why they don't do that. Maybe they're working on a lawsuit now. Could take a little while to put together.
yeah, and I even wonder, what would happen, if, say, some sheriff says, "Look," because county sheriffs can have a lot of power, and some of them do not like the feds at all.
Yeah.
Where let's say, the whoever the county sheriff is at Cornell, where Cornell is, and a bunch of kids are protesting at Cornell, and the sheriff goes out and said, "No, you're not arresting people in my county."
Yeah. Yeah, that could happen. I mean, Ithaca's very liberal. My dad teaches at Cornell, actually.
Yeah, Cornell is that a rivalry? Cornell and Columbia, I suppose it is. They're
Mm,
close together.
Cornell's like the Ivy League for dumb people.
Cornell's the
Columbia is
younger
better.
of the Ivy League colleges because all the
Uh,
rest of them it's not nearly as old. It's kind of been kind of an interesting how that's
yeah, I actually went there, so this is all but I got, good tuition because my dad's been teaching there since 1990.
yeah, that you get a deal or some cases they'll just
Yeah.
for free.
I basically went for free. I think they give you 50% off, but with my financial aid 'cause I had 3 brothers and stuff, so with my
Maybe you still,
financial aid, I didn't really pay anything.
and you might still live
Yeah.
with mom and dad too, so there you go. That's
I didn't, but some people do
yeah.
that.
Yeah, well, it's funny
Yeah.
how some of these some colleges are in big cities and some are just kind of out in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, yeah.
It's yeah, but from what I hear, all the Ivy League is pretty hard left. I don't know if
Yeah, I think Princeton is less so, or is yeah, Princeton, but yeah, I think they're mostly pretty left.
yeah, so yeah, I've had the rule of I'll always vote against the Ivy Leaguer except for Brown. But people ask why Brown? Well, Brown seems like they just want to, be creative and do stuff like that. They don't really they just want to write books or make movies, but yeah, they all have
Yeah,
they all every college has its own attitude, I think, when you get down
yeah.
to it. But so, this is something else too though. What were some of the free speech issues you came up with during the coronavirus nonsense? Because this was just absolutely horrible too. It's what
Yeah,
we had people acting as government agents, it's like, well, imagine you hire you contract out your censorships, like, no, you can't do that, but that's what they were doing. What'd you find in some of
yeah.
these cases?
So, I became aware of this because I was on Twitter, I was friends with people on Twitter, and I was friends with a number of scientists, including, Jay Bhattacharya, who's now the NIH director, and
Oh,
Martin
yes.
Kulldorff, who is we noticed that we were getting, suspended, especially for saying, like, questioning the vaccine at all, the COVID vaccine, like, anything saying, maybe not everybody needs it, and I started noticing that the censorship was escalating when the government would start making these comments, like public comments saying the social media companies should be held accountable for killing people because people are seeing anti-vaccine misinformation, and not getting the vaccine. And I was like, wait a second, the government can't tell private companies to censor people. So there's a doctrine called state action theory in law, which says the government can't use third parties, private companies to do what it can't directly. And I think a sort of analogy that helps people understand this is, the government can't search your home without a warrant under the First Amendment without probable cause and a warrant. Um, well, imagine if the government could just go hire a private company to bust into your home
Yes,
with no warrant. Well, there'd be no purpose to the Fourth Amendment, right? They could just
yes,
outsource everything. So our argument was basically that application should occur in this First Amendment context as well. So the government can't, use and try to influence private companies in any way through coercion or pressure or even just cooperation to censor certain content because the First Amendment prohibits the government from abridging the freedom of speech. This was sort of a novel argument, I think, in large part because it's sort of a social media argument, right? Like pre social media, it was kind of rare that the government could do this kind of thing. Sometimes the government would try to pressure newspapers not to publish a story or something, but I think it's a little different. I could get into those reasons later. It's not exactly the same. So anyway, I brought a lawsuit on behalf of 3 Twitter users in March of 2022 called Changizi versus HHS, and the judge dismissed the
oh,
lawsuit
Mark
and basically
Changizi.
said, "Yeah,
Yeah,
oh,
he's been on here. He's a great guy. Yeah.
yeah, crazy on Israel, but other than that,
Oh, he's
uh,
he's a super cool guy. Yeah,
yeah,
I
yeah."
for why motorcycle helmets can be the yeah,
Yeah, he was actually at my wedding. We're pretty good friends. But so he was we so the judge basically said, well, the companies had social content moderation policies anyway. So you don't know that your clients were censored because of the government. They might have been under the company's own content moderation policies. You have to prove causation here and toss the lawsuit out. I think that analysis was wrong because like how are you ever going to be able to prove that? Especially if you don't get discovery. And the judge was basically like, you can't even get to discovery because you don't have enough evidence to start digging through the government's emails. So dismissed that lawsuit on May 5th, 2022. And by coincidence, I remember that date because the attorneys general of Missouri and Louisiana filed a very similar lawsuit on that exact same day that mine was dismissed, and then they called me up basically and were like, "We need an attorney to represent private plaintiffs in this case, Jay Bhattacharya, Martin Kulldorff, whatever. We saw your complaint, we used some of it. You obviously care about the issue. Will you do it?" So I joined them. In that case, it's actually still ongoing. It's not over, believe it or not, but it got to the Supreme Court on an emergency motion. So this is complicated procedurally, but the regular lawsuit is still ongoing in the lower court. But on the emergency motion, the Supreme Court basically echoed the court's decision in Shangizi and said, you can't show your clients have standing. You can't show that their censorship occurred because the government gave us a little bit of a roadmap for what they would want. They suggested that it would be much stronger if we could show the companies were not censoring on a specific topic until the government demanded it, and then started censoring people, including our plaintiffs. So we need to get a little bit more information. And the judge did say he'll let us get discovery to prove that. Now, Trump's executive order throws a wrinkle in it because the government, I think, is arguing the case is moot, which means that they're not doing this anymore. So you have no ongoing case. So we'll see what happens. But
The decline of big tech, I first remember it coming up when they all bragged about how they got into China and they started censoring people for China. Uh, I knew the guy named John Rowland who ran a website called constitution.org, and it put up a bunch of, documents like the Constitution and other things like that. It was just really a site with documents. But he said as soon as Google and these other places went into China, he noticed it was getting harder to find him in search engines,
huh?
his website and search engines. And, it was
Yeah.
interesting. The only the biggest person who said, "No, I'm not censoring my website for China," was Jimmy Wales of Wikipedia.
Huh. Huh.
Uh,
Huh.
and Jimmy has a background in objectivism, so I actually knew him back in the '90s, and so I said, "Good for him," and I wasn't that shocked. But,
Uh,
if you start censoring, people for foreign governments,
yeah.
and really from what I'm hearing too, as bad as the US is, the EU is horrible.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. The EU is horrible. So, people keep saying now, and I have a lot of uh, libtard relatives who are think, really, really have Trump derangement syndrome. I mean, I'm not a fan of Trump, but really. So they say this is unprecedented. And I don't know if it's the worst assault. It's hard for me to say because what Biden did was, in a way, it was much sneakier and it was a bit cleverer because it wasn't in the public eye and it was hard for us what Trump is doing is right out there. He's making it very clear he's violating the First Amendment, I think, and I hope that judges will not allow this. And in a way, the fact that he's doing it in the public eye, I think, is very helpful for that. Whereas what Biden did was all behind the scenes, and so made it very hard to prove, which was basically our issue. And it affected. It's hard to say which affects more, right? It was affecting all of discourse on certain topics on social media for a while. So people couldn't get different perspectives like Bhattacharya and Kulldorff's about lockdowns and the vaccines and mask mandates. So that had a very bad impact. The censorship now, I would say, is sort of directly affecting fewer people. Like right now, it's just the people who are under arrest and their families or in ICE detention and their families. But it's having an extreme chilling effect. Like if I was a citizen, I would not a citizen, sorry, I would shut up. I am a citizen. So I'm continuing to talk about Palestine. But I mean, you're not safe. And if you have a family here and you don't want to risk being sent back to the country you're a citizen of, I would stop talking about it. So they're both very bad. And I think what it
Yeah.
shows is that we're just in an authoritarian age.
Yeah, it seems to be that way. And I'm really bothered also by this whole, we're gonna go back through your forms and your applications because
Yeah.
it seems to me as if you've been I'd probably say 2 years. If you've been a citizen for a certain amount of time, you hear other countries stripping people's citizenship, and I don't think that should be something that should be able to happen without some kind
Yeah.
of process. And
Yeah, I mean, are entitled to due process, but it's just there was actually and this was about 10 years ago, and I don't remember the details of the case. There was a Palestinian woman actually who was stripped of her citizenship. And I don't recall. I don't recall the details. She might have actually done something wrong. I think the allegation was that she had actually had some connection to terrorist groups when she was in the Middle East, but I don't think she did anything, and I think it was the kind of connections that, like, Hamas is a governmental entity, like, if you live there, you're likely to have some kind of connections to people who are members of Hamas. Um, so I don't think she had done anything wrong, and it was clearly a political, persecution, and they did strip her of her citizenship. So they found some mistake she had made on her form and, said she had lied, and so she was stripped of her citizenship and sent away.
I guess it makes me wonder how long did they keep these forms around?
Yeah.
I've also got some concerns, too, and I know Andrew Henderson, Nomad Capitalist, is talking about this. Concerns about making it more difficult just for Americans to have second citizenships, and there's
Mhm.
different attacks on this coming different ways. Uh,
Well, I mean, so I actually have mixed feelings because I am, well, I mean, I'm not a fan of, dual citizens serving in government, and I think, for
yeah,
obvious reasons, I think we see a lot of the nefarious influence there when it comes to people having more loyalty to Israel. I know you're not supposed to say that.
yeah,
Uh,
and I'm looking more of as a way though of I don't want to put all my eggs into this basket.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I think, and as governments become more corrupt and more unprincipled and just, and I mean, and I would say if America wants people only to have one citizenship, they need to make themselves special. But America doesn't want to be special. America just wants to be as
yeah,
corrupt as everybody else.
yeah.
So it's and yeah, I understand the sentiments too. You have dual loyalties, or but you also say, well, look, I say, give me something that's how do I know you're not gonna? Because sometimes having that second citizenship can get you out of trouble. It's
Oh, for sure. I'm actually a dual citizen of Germany, weirdly. Not what you would guess, but
I didn't know that could be done. I thought
yeah.
I thought Germany outlawed that. Yeah.
It's very rare because, my grandfather. This is very strange, but my father's Palestinian, from Palestine and came here in his 20s, but my
Yes.
mom's father was a German Jewish Holocaust survivor. That's shorthand. He fled Nazi Germany in '36, so he didn't, like, actually survive the camps, but so they give citizenship to the descendants. My mom had to do a lot of work to prove everything. She, like, went to
Yeah.
archives in Vienna and stuff like that, but, they gave us citizenship, so I have that and I'm holding on to it 'cause but Germany, I mean, Europe is awful on free speech right now. Like, I don't wanna live anywhere where I have to be worried about the police knocking on my door because of my social
Yeah.
media posts, which I would say we're kinda here now.
But as this shows, you're really on both sides of this though. You've got
Yeah,
a grandparent who was a Jewish Holocaust survivor, and you've got
yeah,
a father who's Palestinian.
yeah,
And you're connected to this both ways, and it's
yeah,
you just want to see peace, and you just want to be able to live
I
your
do.
life, and yeah,
Yeah, exactly. I just wanna be able to raise my son in a world where people aren't happy about killing babies.
I know you. Yeah, you have one son.
Yeah, he's 14 months, so that's a whole, weird, thing, just like raising a child while looking at pictures of kids with their heads blown off every day for
Oh, I know. Yeah, it's kind
15
of
it's been
scary. Yeah, you think about.
yeah,
Yeah, I can imagine what's yeah, yeah. So you probably haven't been married that long, so yeah. Anyway,
yeah.
is your husband a lawyer too, or
No, no, right now he's a stay-at-home dad,
okay?
but he is in, like, land preservation stuff, not like he's not, like, super, but he's like, so conservation easements to try to protect certain areas of land and stuff.
Oh yes, like Walden Woods or something. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
I do wonder. That's wild though. Yeah, I do. The censorship. I don't know if there is. In a way, America probably still is the best in the world on free speech. I don't really, even though it's not as good here as it should be.
We do have a First Amendment,
Yeah,
unlike basically any other country, so that allows, at least we can bring these cases to court and hopefully win, and, there have been periods in history where there was hysteria and the government did bad things, and sometimes the courts took a little while to come along, like during the Red Scare, the worst case law for someone like Mahmoud Khalil, came out of the Red Scare. There were a couple of cases where the Supreme Court said that belonging to the Communist Party at any point in your life, even if you'd left, could and you weren't a citizen, could be a basis for deportation. But there are other cases from the same time period where the Supreme Court said non-citizens have First Amendment rights, even in the case of a communist. I think the way that they can be distinguished is that the bad cases is that even being a member of the Communist Party was punishable as an American. So I think they saw it as like membership in a party that was seeking to overthrow the United States
Yes.
government. I don't think anybody can claim that even if even if Khalil was a Hamas member, which he's clearly not. Hamas is not trying to overthrow the United States government.
Yeah, it's not.
So I think you can just, and he's not accused of actually belonging to any kind of organization that is doing that. Um, so I think these cases are distinguishable, but we have seen panics in the past, and sometimes one thing as a lawyer, as a strategic litigator, it's difficult because when a panic is happening, and this actually we found out during COVID, courts also they're people, and actually they're older people, so they tended to succumb to the panic about COVID. So it was hard. We got bad rulings, and what happens then is you sort of calcified bad law for the future. So some strategic litigators will say you should not bring the cases during the emergency. You should wait till it dies down. Like,
Yes.
unfortunately, people have to live for like a year or two with, stay-at-home orders or whatever. But then you're not going to solidify the bad precedent, which happened. But it's hard because when the emergency is happening, you want to defend people's rights. So I'm always torn about what to do.
Well, it also and sometimes the damage is done, it's often said too, they pass these laws just to do the damage, and they know they're going to get thrown out.
Yeah,
It's really a troubling situation,
it is.
I say that up because I think America is one of the few countries where they don't where Holocaust revisionists aren't arrested. I mean, as disgusting as they are, I'm
Yeah.
still glad they're not arrested here.
Absolutely. I mean, you should be able to engage in any, and also, that kind of censorship doesn't work. When people are told you can't even talk about this thing, I think they start to be like, "Well, why not?"
I don't there is that, why can't I talk about it or what and it also just drives the conversation underground. So you don't really know what these people are saying and they end up becoming more into their own
Mhm.
echo chamber. And so
Yeah.
therefore they become more extreme in what they believe.
Yeah. Yeah,
It
I mean,
doesn't work.
a perfect yeah, exactly. A perfect example is, during the height of, like, the vaccine stuff in Twitter when a lot of people didn't wanna get the vaccine, they'd get kicked off Twitter for talking about it, and so they started going over to Gab and Getter, which were much more extreme. So if somebody said the vaccine has a microchip on Getter, you'd have 10 people saying, "Yeah, it does have a microchip," whereas if you say that on Twitter, you have a lot of people being like, "No, actually it doesn't, and here's why we know it doesn't." So what happens is you actually when you forbid certain topics of conversation or certain viewpoints, people just go and find their groups and talk about it, and then they don't have outsiders challenge it. So it's bad, and censorship is a bad idea in every way.
Do you think this will ever be figured out? I it seems like it's always a battle. I mean, I and I tell people, I'm old enough to remember when conservatives wanted to cancel Ozzy Osbourne and
Mm.
even in the early days, Bart Simpson. So, what is there's always somebody out there who says, we have to suppress this speech because it's bad and it's harmful. But you're basically you're taking, you're initiating violence against a nonviolent act. And that's how
Yeah.
I see it. It's
That's a very good way of putting it. Yeah, I don't think it'll ever be fixed, and that I do think it's human nature to want to silence ideas you don't like that offend you. So I think there will always be people trying to do that. That's why there have to be people who fight back. We can't, so it's annoying. I don't like I actually really just wanna, like, go enjoy my free time instead of, talking about free speech all the time, but we have to push back. I think that's I don't think it'll ever be solved, and that I think there will always be people, and, one thing and I think it comes up in this current context is nobody ever says, I just want to censor ideas I don't like, right? Nobody ever says that. They come up with ways to, oh, it's terroristic speech. Oh, it threatens America. Oh, it's killing people if you say that the vaccines might not be a good idea for
all
everybody, or that you come
protecting
up with these
children
reasons.
also. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. But what it is censorship, and it was true under the Biden administration, and it's true under the Trump administration.
Yeah. I don't know if we've ever, it's kind of scary to think, well, when was the last time we really had a free speech president? Maybe it was Clinton.
Yeah.
It certainly wasn't the second Bush. You know, yeah, it's a
I mean, I don't know that any of them. I don't know how much they actually cared about it, but they weren't making these efforts to stifle free speech. And it's I mean, I think, one of the things that's really disturbed me a lot is a lot of the people I worked with during COVID, who claim to be free speech warriors are now justifying and championing the censorship around the Israel-Palestine issue. And what they're saying is, "This is different. These people don't have rights. Non-citizens don't have rights," or "This is about, silencing anti-Semitism," or, Jews are in danger, and so, like, that's always the justification that's used for censorship. It's the same kind of tactics that the left uses when it comes to hate speech, or, saying we can't allow people to question whether trans women should play in women's sports because that's, you know, it's
Yeah,
the same thing.
it's going to hurt somebody's feelings. Yeah, it's gotten
Yeah,
so ridiculous. I don't know where it goes from here. I mean, we've got, certainly things like libel and, defamatory laws.
yeah,
I don't know how you feel about intellectual property, and also I don't know if you've covered this much now too. I've had some people on here who've discussed cases where people are now in jail just for writing code.
wow.
And,
Wait, I didn't know
well,
about that.
this is on stuff like cryptocurrency and
Oh,
law, and
yeah,
and
wow,
exchanges. You can get arrested just for writing code.
wow.
It's really scary. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, and
that's
code, and
extremely
really,
scary.
it's also this kind idea realizing, now that, well, free speech only applied, to paper and stuff like that, because that's what happened when the founding fathers happened. No, it's because we have all these new ways to speak that we didn't have before. And
Yeah. Yeah, exactly, exactly. I mean, obviously, they didn't have the internet,
I
but
really, I think, and this is kind of a stretch, but to me, even price controls violate free speech.
Mm,
You're communicating what you think something is worth and what you want somebody to pay for it. So if you put a
yeah.
price control on it, you're really censoring somebody. You're
Yeah. I mean, that I haven't thought about that. I it's widely accepted that, like, the government can require cigarette companies, for instance, to put
Yeah.
cancer warnings on there. I have questions about that. That's like people think you're crazy even in the free speech world if
Yeah,
you
I do
say
too.
that.
And, and I think some cases also, consumer organizations would take care of that, like Consumer Reports or Underwriters Laboratories. I mean, I do appreciate, for example, that when I buy supplements, I have this little chart of what's, in the supplements.
Yeah.
It's nice to know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And funny, as I've traveled abroad too, they're much more explicit. Like some cases, it'll just say "smoking kills." Both of us have more water
Yeah.
convoluted warnings. But anyway, so, I don't is there anything else we need to be concerned about on the free speech horizon right now? It seems like the coronavirus censorship seems to be over, but,
Yeah.
that's also another case too, though, where, occupational licensing needs to just be thrown out, and people
Yeah.
you're gonna take away doctor's license because he's prescribing what he thinks is right. You have to let people, because there is no virtue when people can't follow their conscience.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think one, like, lesson to remember, from the past 5 years is just the censorship that you champion one day can be used against you. I actually just wrote a piece about this that was published in Compact,
Yeah.
and it's pretty stark because the case I talked about that reached the Supreme Court, Missouri versus Biden, it was called Murphy versus Missouri in the Supreme Court's complicated procedural stuff's the name switch. Murphy being the Surgeon General. The doctrine that sort of arose from that said that if you're alleging that the government is coercing a third party to censor you, you have like a very high burden to show causation. That the causation arose from the government, not the third party's independent decision making. Now, this I think will arise in the cases of students who are being punished on college campuses for pro-Palestine advocacy. They will now have to show that the government the universities are succumbing to the government pressure and starting to punish students. There was one who was punished for just writing an op-ed. She's a citizen, so they're not, there's no deportation angle there, but, and there was a student who was expelled, actually, he was Jewish, for pro-Palestine advocacy from Columbia, and this is all clearly because they're afraid the government has said they're gonna deprive them of federal funding if they don't capitulate on this. So, now the students are gonna have to deal with this doctrine where they're gonna have to show that it wasn't the university's own decision making, it was the government. So, a lot of liberals, when I took that case to the Supreme Court, a lot of my liberal relatives were like, "You're wrong, this is misinformation, the government has to protect us from misinformation." Like, you champion that, now that is going to be used against your speech, and I think that's the lesson, from the current era. And also, just one note on the university funding issue, like, I'm not a fan of the government funding universities, I think they should stop funding universities, but if they're going to fund universities, it's pretty clear. I mean, the Supreme Court case law, which I think is reasonable, says that the government, once they start to fund something, they can't take away funds based on, suppression of certain viewpoints. So, I'm all for stopping government funding, but then they have to be consistent. You can't fund pro-Israel universities and not pro-Palestine universities.
Yeah, I wanna bring up this quote from Jefferson, as great as he was. Quote, "It is error alone which needs the support of government. Truth can
Mm.
stand by itself."
Oh, that's a beautiful quote, yeah,
Yeah, that is so
yeah.
I don't know what he would imagine if he saw
Oh,
things today.
I'm sure they're turning over in their graves everything that they warned about is is what has come to pass.
Jefferson would mostly be turning over in his grave about the fact is like, "Why are you involved with all these different countries?"
Yeah,
Uh, and, that's another thing too, I always just go and say, "Look, I don't want us involved in this. Let them fight. I don't care if
yeah,
they fight or not, but it's not my business.
yeah,
I've got no I don't think I'll ever go visit there just because I don't think it'd be particularly safe to go visit there.
yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. And Washington warned about entanglements with other countries, so I think he would also be
It's very much a tragedy. It's like I said, it's funny, we didn't have any enemies in the Middle East before 1947,
Yeah,
so why do we have them now?
yeah,
Yeah, I guess I feel safe because I was born and raised here. I don't think they can really question that, but who knows? I've
yeah.
got all my paperwork, but yeah,
Mhm.
that's wild that she managed to get a citizenship in Germany because, like I said, it's
Yeah.
not that's very uncommon that somebody can have German
Yeah.
American
They feel so guilty about the Holocaust that they, like, have this exception. So,
there is a lot of guilt about that, and I understand it.
yeah.
You have to. The most important thing is don't be guilty, but just don't do the same things you did
Well,
before, and they're doing the same things.
the same things I know, they didn't learn the true lesson of the Holocaust, which
Yeah,
is, like, this should never happen again to anybody, and it doesn't seem anybody learned the true
censorship,
lesson.
and it's still the only country where as far as I know, it's still the only country where it's explicitly illegal to homeschool your kids.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know, and I don't know how you feel about other issues of civil liberties or anything else you've gotten into. Uh,
Well, I'm generally a civil libertarian, so
yeah,
my focus is free speech. I haven't necessarily thought every single issue through,
I'd
but
love
definitely for parental rights and education.
I'd love to ask you more about your time as a public defender. That's got to have some good stories because that's so important in my opinion. It just you've got
Oh, thank you.
got it. People got to have law. It's
Yeah.
a guy who went to my high school actually did both in my county. He was the prosecutor and he was the public defender.
Oh, that not at the same time, I hope.
Not at the same time.
Yeah.
It's
That's
a county of about 30,000 people.
yeah.
It's just where everybody kind of knows everybody.
Yeah.
He's worn a lot of different hats as a lawyer.
Yeah.
Do lawyers usually just stay in one field of law, or do they kind of go from
It
here?
depends. I mean, I switched from criminal to constitutional. It just depends. I think a lot of people like to build up a specialty, and that's probably the most lucrative way is just like, be the best at but, I get bored, frankly.
Or they should ask
I
you,
need variety.
what was your greatest acquittal as a public defender?
Oh, so I did appeals,
What's
so
on your
people had
bucket
already been convicted. So I had, well, your audience is gonna hate me. People don't love criminal defense attorneys, I get so much like, "Why would you ever wanna defend those people?"
We're libertarians.
Yeah. Okay, if you have a really libertarian audience, that's probably good. I had a couple reversals. I actually really like Fourth Amendment law, so I'd had a couple of successes with, maybe my favorite one was a guy who had robbed he was like a black guy, he and his friend robbed a mafia poker game in Queens, and, the guys were armed and stabbed my client. And he had to go to the hospital, he was stabbed in the stomach, so he, like, ran out, but he had taken, one of the guy's IDs and cash, like, his I think it was just his wallet, and when he got to the hospital, they said, he had to put his belongings in a locker, so he did, and he was being operated on because he had a very serious stomach wound, and the cop came by and said, "Where are your belongings?" And he said, "In the locker." So she went to the locker and she found the wallet that belonged to one of the mafia guys that he'd robbed. And, that what connected him to the crime, and they had no other evidence except that. So he was convicted and sentenced to, like, 25 to life, and because he was a mul he was a, had offended before.
Yes.
So I argued that the search was bad because when he said, "My stuff's in the locker," that wasn't giving her consent to search, and I won on that. So, like I said, he was just making a statement of fact, he wasn't giving implicit consent. The government argued that was implicit consent. And also, he was literally having his stomach operated on, so I was like, even,
Yeah.
like that you can't.
Yeah, he can't
So
consent. Yeah.
he got out, like the court ruled, and he got out the next day.
Well,
And people do not love those cases because the person did the bad thing, um, but the evidence had to be suppressed. So
the officer could have also waited until he was conscious to, give consent.
yeah,
There
yeah,
really is, there really is a situation like that. Yeah, but that's what. But we have those, because I know Barry Cooper. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he would often talk about how to deal with, drug arrests, and he says dogs will often false alert when they're walking around a
mm,
car.
yeah,
Literally to make it look like,
interesting.
"Oh, dog says, I think there are drugs in here." And they just make it
Yeah,
they train the dog to do that, and he says
huh,
those searches are baloney. That's what he said.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, some people aren't a fan of the exclusionary rule, that mean like, and that was not
Yeah,
necessarily taken for granted at the beginning that like if the cops get evidence illegally, it can't be used at trial. Some scholars have argued that's bad. Like there's just because the evidence was gotten illegally doesn't mean it shouldn't be used or they can't use it. There can be other repercussions like punishing the cop. But basically courts or the Supreme Court sort of went through all the options and found like that's the only one that will actually deter them from doing a bad search in the first place. So I think it does protect us all, so the cops just can't storm into your house anytime they feel like it and search it. But it's counterintuitive to people. A lot of what I always sort of have to explain. Like I feel like a lot of my work has always been counterintuitive to like the general population. They're like, why would you want to defend criminals? Why do you want to defend people saying that the COVID vaccine doesn't work? Like,
well, it's an acknowledgment of the system's imperfections and
yeah,
that the system will make mistakes, and it's just a question of, would I rather have it make mistakes on the side of guilty people walking out, or would I rather have it make mistakes on the side of innocent people being locked up? And I'd rather have
yeah,
a few guilty people walk out.
yeah, totally,
And
totally.
I think if you really, that's always been my reasoning is why we have these. It's just there's a and you do sometimes have those situations that just seem very heinous where the evidence is obvious. Uh, you
Yeah,
uh, well, uh, I don't think there's much more to talk about at this point. You have anything else
yeah.
before we go? It's been
No, I think.
really cool having you on here. You've got
Yeah, thank
lots,
you for having me.
a lawyer
You
and
too.
fun, yes.
There are like 4 or 5 of us, so
I'm glad you can enjoy doing this work because it's got I can imagine it has a lot of emotion on it, just
yeah, you can ask my husband someday. He'll tell
yeah.
you. I'm always stressed, but I
Do you want
appreciate you
your
having me
kids
on.
doing it? The ultimate question is, do you want your kids doing this profession?
No,
Yeah.
no. He's shown an early aptitude for music. He's, like, always running around trying to bang on the keyboard and the guitar, so I'm like, "Go with the music."
I had so many people I had so many people tell me, "Much as you like arguing, you should have been lawyering."
Yeah, it's a tough job. It's stressful for many, many reasons. If you believe in what you're doing, it's stressful because losing is very hard then and dealing with the fallout is hard, and if you, don't believe in what you're doing, it's really boring, so and kind of not
I
rewarding,
wouldn't think
so
it'd be fun to, believe, that's the thing, what do you do when I really think this guy is guilty, but I have to defend him anyway.
yeah. I, um I didn't have that much of a problem with it when I did it. I saw myself very much as, like, playing a role, um, I think the system in New York actually works pretty well. Not necessarily everywhere, sometimes I think there are, like, racial issues or whatever, but New York was pretty good. I'm playing my role, the prosecutor's playing their role. Usually justice is achieved. Sometimes someone gets out who's a kinda bad person, but,
Yeah.
uh that's sort of what the price we pay to make sure the system, people aren't put in jail when they shouldn't be or prison.
Yeah, and it doesn't undo what was done, it's not it's
Yeah.
it's not gonna bring if somebody's dead, it's not gonna bring them back. That's
Yeah.
well,
Yeah,
anyway,
exactly.
it's been where can we find you out there? If you got a
Well,
website
I'm on
yeah,
X, Twitter, my name at Jenin Younes Esquire, ESQ. And then I do some writing here and there for different magazines and stuff, so I usually post my stuff.
yeah,
And I have a
gotcha.
podcast, Previously Prohibited, with my co-host Mel. So those are
Co-host
those
too?
are the main places. Her name is Mel. She's Melissa Whitty. She's a Southern conservative, but very pro-Palestine. We talk a lot about the Middle East.
That should be interesting, yeah, I've had a
Yeah.
few people
You
talk
should
about that issue. Well,
you should have her on. She'd be fun.
yeah. Janine, as far as, you wanna talk about defending people who seem undefendable, go back a few uh, I just had it uploaded, a guy actually made a case for Jerry Sandusky.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Interesting. Okay.
so
Huh.
I definitely wanna
Fascinating.
I think you've got if there's reasonable doubts, you gotta let him go, but
Yeah. Oh,
anyway,
yeah.
please like this video, subscribe to my channel, go buy my novel Escape from the Village, check out my Substack, you can also give and buy me a coffee, and, thank you, Jenin Younes, I'm Chris Baker,
Thank
we're
you.
buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to the Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Support the forum. Go to buymeacoffee.com/fountainheadforum. Thank you.